Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe, and alongside me, as always, is the brilliant Sunny.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip and Talkers, no matter what time zone you're in. It's great to have you back with us.
Welcome. So today we are now Japanese seafood again. It seems like they can ban anything except maybe their own pettiness.
And every single time they use the exact same rhetoric. It's almost word for word.
What's the line this time?
It's always food safety concerns, or quarantine failure, or my personal favorite, based on scientific judgment.
But everyone knows, everyone watching this knows it's not about science. It's just about Beijing's mood on a particular day.
Right.
So why do they never, ever admit that this is political retaliation? It seems so obvious.
Well, it's simple, really. The moment they admit it, the whole thing it blows up in their face.
How so?
First, it's a direct violation of WTO rules, the World Trade Organization. And admission means the international accusations stick immediately. There's no argument.
So it's a legal minefield for them.
A huge one. Second, they lose all moral high ground. They go from presenting themselves as this, responsible major power to a grumpy old auntie who throws a fit.
And third, it's like handing ammunition to their rivals.
Exactly. It gives Japan, the US, the EU, it gives them the concrete evidence they need to formally propose sanctions against China. They'd be handing them the gun.
And what about domestically? Inside China?
That might be the biggest reason.
Yeah.
The domestic opinion would just flip. You've been telling your people for years that you're protecting them from toxic food, and then you admit it was all just political revenge.
That's a massive betrayal of trust.
Huge. And honestly, there's something even bigger that China is afraid of confronting. It goes way back.
What's that?
The pile of promises they made when they joined the WTO. Back in 2001, they said they'd open their markets, reform state-owned enterprises, slash subsidies, and force technology transfers.
The whole list.
The whole list. And here we are 24 years later, and almost none of it has been fully done. So on the surface, they say, we follow the rules, but the reality is more like, I agreed, but I never actually said I'd do it.
Wow. So this whole pattern, it really shows a simple but a pretty brutal fact.
What's that?
Doing business with the Chinese Communist Party means you're not watching the market. You're watching Beijing's mood.
That's why everyone, and I mean everyone from supply chain managers, tech firms, energy producers, all the way to investors, is basically doing the same thing right now.
Which is?
Accelerating decoupling, de-risking, or, the blunter term, de-centralization, getting their exposure down.
So today, we're going to break all of this down. How does this fake science, real revenge trade tactic actually impact global supply chains?
And we'll look at how much international credibility the CCP really has left.
And finally, why so many people are now saying you can cooperate with China, but you just can't trust it too much.
Are you ready? Let's unpack.
Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah.
This latest ban is it's wild because the so-called thawing period, it barely lasted long enough for the ice to even start melting.
Not at all. And the timeline itself just screams political volatility. You really have to trace it back to see the scale of this reversal.
So where does it start?
Well, the initial flashpoint was August 2023. That's when the first comprehensive ban on all Japanese seafood was put in place. It was right after the release of the treated water from the Fukushima plant.
And that was a huge economic shock for Japanese fishermen and exporters.
A massive shock. And for almost 2 years after that, you had these long, drawn-out negotiations. Everyone was trying to set up some kind of, scientific framework to get trade moving again.
Which seemed to work. For a minute.
For a minute, yes.
Yep.
Fast forward to June 2025. After all this intense diplomatic pressure, Beijing finally agrees to a conditional easing of the ban.
Conditional how?
It was very specific. Only seafood from outside the 10 most restricted prefectures. So places like Fukushima, Miyagi was allowed. Everything else was still banned.
And even for the stuff that was allowed, I imagine the hurdles were immense.
Oh, incredibly stringent. Exporters needed to provide proof of origin down to the specific fishing boat. They needed complex radioactivity test certificates for every single shipment.
Wow.
It was all designed to look like this really rigorous science-based regulation.
And the Japanese side, they were just desperate to get back into that huge market, so they jumped through all the hoops.
They did, but the success was, it was extremely limited. In early November 2025, so just a couple of weeks ago, the first few tiny shipments actually made it through.
How tiny are we talking?
We saw reports of maybe 6 tons of high-value products like frozen scallops from Hokkaido. But here's the crucial part. Only 3 Japanese companies had actually managed to complete the entire months-long, arduous Chinese registration process.
Only 3. Out of how many?
Hundreds. So the volume was minuscule, but it proved one thing. Technical compliance was possible, even if it was incredibly difficult.
And then, just as they proved it could be done,
the rug was pulled out. Today, November 19th, China formally notified Japan through diplomatic channels that the comprehensive ban is back on, reinstated.
a total freeze, back to square one.
Back to the exact same situation as late 2023. And you have to look at the official excuse versus what was really happening behind the scenes.
The smoke screen versus the real fire.
Exactly. The official reason, delivered by the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning, was, well, it was entirely predictable.
Okay, what was the stated reason for flipping back like this? Just 2 weeks after they started accepting goods.
The main technical excuse was that Japan had, and I quote, failed to provide promised technical monitoring materials to prove long-term safety.
Which is so vague.
It's completely vague. It's impossible to verify or disprove on the spot. But then she said something else, a chilling little addition that just gave the entire game away.
That was the no market comment, right?
Yes, the no market comment. She said that under the current circumstances, even if Japanese seafood were exported to China, there is no market.
When you hear that, it's not about parts per million of tritium. It's about something else entirely.
It's a direct and frankly unusual admission that the ban isn't driven by health inspections, but by mobilized domestic anti-Japanese sentiment.
So the state media creates the sentiment.
And then the government acts to satisfy that manufactured public opinion. It's a closed loop. They're admitting the goal is political and not scientific.
Okay, so let's talk about the real fire. The
Yeah.
high-level politics that actually triggered this. The Japanese media seems to have a consensus on this.
Oh, they do. Outlets like Kyodo News, NHK, Nikkei, they're all unanimously pointing to one single event.
What was it?
The trigger was a major foreign policy statement from Japan's Prime Minister, Kishisane. She stood up in Parliament and said something that crossed a huge Chinese red line.
The Taiwan statement.
The Taiwan statement. She said, Taiwan's emergency is Japan's emergency.
And that's a fundamental shift, isn't it? It moves Japan away from its traditional strategic ambiguity on Taiwan.
It's a massive shift. It signals that Japan would likely get involved, or at the very least provide logistical and intelligence support if there were a conflict over Taiwan. For Beijing, that statement is a grave threat, and it far outweighs any concern they might have over some scallops.
The timing is just. It's too perfect to be a coincidence.
It can't be, especially when you see the other diplomatic signals. The temperature was spiking right before the ban was announced.
I saw reports about some pointedly disrespectful behavior.
Yes, the diplomatic theater. Japanese media widely reported that a high-level Chinese official, Liu Jinsong, met with Japanese diplomats and was described as sending them off with his hands in his pockets.
Which is a classic, deliberate sign of contempt in that world.
It's a nonverbal message of disdain and anger. And that insult happened immediately before the formal ban notification went out.
And this wasn't just about seafood, was it? It was part of a bigger pressure campaign, a whole coercion package.
The political signal had to be comprehensive. So alongside the trade freeze, we saw the suspension of new Japanese movie imports for approval.
Yeah, cultural punishment.
Hitting the creative industries. Then you had these internal notifications going out within powerful state-owned Chinese banks to halt all employee business travel to Japan.
So a financial freeze, too.
Exactly. Designed to restrict economic ties. And finally, they canceled or postponed academic conferences and so-called friendship activities between the two countries.
So one political statement about Taiwan results in the instant weaponization of trade, culture, and finance. It just underscores that, in Beijing eyes, geopolitical alignment will always trump any pretense of free trade.
It seems that way. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that the actual safety of the seafood was never really the issue.
Right. The science has been stable this whole time. It's the policy that's been bouncing all over the place.
And that's why the food safety excuse is really just a technical shield. It's something the rest of the world sees right through, but it provides just enough cover.
So let's talk about that science.
Yeah.
What does the actual safety data say?
The data is, well, it's unequivocal. It's not even a close call. Japanese seafood, especially the products that are sourced hundreds of miles away from the restricted areas, like those valuable Hokkaido scallops or northern tuna, They have consistently shown radiation levels that are far, far below international standards.
We're not talking about just squeaking by under the limit.
Not at all. We're talking orders of magnitude safer. And this isn't just based on Japan's own self-reporting.
Right, because critics would just dismiss that.
Yeah.
Who's the international body here?
The main regulator is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've had monitors on the ground in Japan and have been conducting monthly sampling of the ocean and coastal areas since the discharge began in 2023.
And what have their reports shown?
Their reports have been consistently clear. The concentration of tritium is well below 1,000th of the World Health Organization's standard for safe drinking water.
1,000. So to put that in perspective for everyone listening, that level is often basically indistinguishable from the natural background radiation that exists everywhere.
That's right. Or from the levels you might find in tap water in many other cities around the world. The other critical radionuclides are either not detectable at all or are present in such trace amounts that they are scientifically irrelevant. The danger is, for all practical purposes, zero.
The science is settled then.
The science is settled. And really, the clearest proof that China knows this is the fact that they agreed to partially lift the ban back in June.
That is the smoking gun, isn't it?
Yeah.
If the food was actually dangerous, if it was fundamentally contaminated, no government, no matter the politics, would allow any of it into their country.
Exactly. Not even with certification. By agreeing to accept certified imports from those non-restricted areas, China was implicitly admitting that the product is safe if it goes through the proper testing and certification.
So the decision to then reverse that policy just a few months later couldn't be because of some sudden change in ocean chemistry.
Or a sudden breakdown in Japanese monitoring. It was a political decision, plain and simple.
So the core argument from critics isn't about the test results themselves. It's about the manipulation of the standards.
It's about predictability and reliability. If the scientific data says a product is safe, but the party leadership is angry about Taiwan, the policy instantly becomes that product is banned, and they will generate some vague technical justification for it after the fact.
The result comes first. The reasoning comes later.
Exactly. The problem isn't the detection result. It's the regime's willingness to just ignore its own regulatory frameworks whenever it's politically convenient.
We used this analogy before, but it really captures the risk here. It's like you, the exporter, you've passed every inspection. The IAEA says you're safe. But the government, who is the landlord in this case, looks at you and says, you know what? I don't like your tie. And in fact, I've decided your tie is a health hazard. And then they lock your store.
That's a perfect analogy because it highlights the core vulnerability. It doesn't matter how compliant you are. Your business is ultimately subject to a political veto at any time.
Which is why the overwhelming consensus from global media Reuters, Bloomberg, The Guardian, is that this ban is diplomatic retaliation, not a scientific decision.
And the proof is in what other countries are doing, or rather what they're not doing.
Right. If this were a real food safety crisis, every major importer would have slammed the brakes on Japanese seafood.
But they haven't. The US, the EU, the UK, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, they're all major importers. And they all continue to import Japanese scallops, salmon, and other species completely normally.
Some of them have even increased their purchases, right?
Yeah.
To help out the Japanese exporters.
Yes, many have stepped up since 2023 to support the industry after it lost the China market. It shows that only China is treating this trade flow as a political remote control, turning it on and off based purely on geopolitical spats.
And that kind of instability is what forces companies and entire countries to make these really difficult long-term strategic decisions about where they do business. Which brings us to the playbook. Because this gets really interesting when you realize this isn't a one-off. This isn't just about Japan. It's a fixed, predictable template.
It is. It's a core part of Beijing's geopolitical strategy. The official term for it is economic coercion.
Let's define that. What exactly is it?
Economic coercion is the deliberate use of trade measures, things like sudden quarantine issues, import bans, customs delays, punitive tariffs as a form of leverage or retaliation against another country's foreign policy choices.
And the key is that they never, ever admit the political motive.
Never. The official story is always a facade of technical market-based justification. It's always about pests or contaminants or dumping.
So let's go through the list, the unfortunate roll call of victims. This is the list that basically defines China as a high-risk partner for a lot of multinational companies.
Yeah.
We have to start with Australia.
Australia's experience from 2020 to 2023 was really the blueprint for what's happening to Japan now, but on a much, much larger scale. We're talking billions of dollars.
And what was their political sin? What was the trigger?
It was two things, primarily. First, Canberra called for an independent international investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
And second, they banned Huawei from their 5G network.
And the retaliation was swift and broad.
It was devastating. It targeted almost every major Australian export. They slapped massive tariffs over 80% on Australian wine and barley. They put in place these unofficial rolling bans on beef, coal, cotton, timber, and rock lobsters.
And the excuses were all over the place.
Almost comically so. For the lobsters, it was vague inspection failures or detecting heavy metals. For barley, it was pests. For coal, it was environmental standards or just mysterious customs delays, a different reason for every product.
It was designed to be impossible to fight as a single case at the WTO.
Precisely. The impact was over 20 billion Australian dollars. It was painful in the short term, but there was an unexpected silver lining.
Diversification.
Exactly. Australian industries were forced to aggressively pivot. They found new, more reliable markets in Southeast Asia, in India, in Europe. And in the long run, that diversification actually made their economy more resilient to this kind of coercion. It's a lesson Japan is learning now.
Okay, next on the list, Lithuania. Their case from 2021 to 2023 was just. It was a stunningly blatant example of weaponized bureaucracy.
It really was. Lithuania's political transgression was allowing Taiwan to open a representative office in their capital, Vilnius, using the name Taiwan.
Instead of the political acceptable Chinese Taipei.
Right. Using the name Taiwan crossed one of Beijing's core red lines about sovereignty. And the punishment was, well, it was creative.
What did they do to a small Baltic state?
They executed this unprecedented technical move. They essentially went into their customs system and just deleted Lithuania's country code.
Wait, they just erased them from the system?
Erased them, which meant all direct exports from Lithuania to China were instantly blocked. But it was worse than that. It also blocked imports from any other country if that product contained Lithuanian components.
So it hit major European supply chains.
It was a huge blow to German and French companies that had factories in Lithuania. It was a brilliant and vicious way to punish a small country while also putting pressure on its bigger partners, like Germany, to get them in line.
That is next-level bureaucratic warfare.
It is. Lithuanian exports to China plunged 91%. The international response was strong, though. Taiwan famously stepped in and symbolically bought 20,000 bottles of Lithuanian rum that were blocked.
Just solidarity.
A clear message that allies will stand together against this kind of thing. We also saw it with the Philippines in 2022.
Right, in the South China Sea.
As the Philippines started strengthening its position there and aligning more with the U.S., Beijing suddenly suspended imports of their tropical fruits, bananas, pineapples, claiming they had detected harmful organisms.
It's always a quarantine issue. So simple, so effective.
But maybe the most important warning story of all is Honduras. This is a case of what happens when you try to switch sides.
What happened there?
Honduras, from 2023 to 2025, decided to switch its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China. They were hoping to unlock that huge Chinese market. China, in return, promised massive purchases of Honduran goods, especially their white shrimp, to replace the stable market they were losing in Taiwan.
They were promised an economic upgrade. So what happened?
The deal never really materialized. China delayed the purchases. They imposed these incredibly strict, constantly changing quarantine rules that were impossible for Honduran exporters to meet. The result was a catastrophe for the local industry.
So they lost their old market and never really got the new one.
Exactly. Honduran shrimp exports plummeted by 67%. They traded a stable, predictable partner in Taiwan for a volatile, unreliable one in China. Reports showed that around 14,000 workers lost their jobs.
Wow. So even when Beijing wins the diplomatic game, their economic promises can be completely hollow. It's the ultimate bait and switch.
And we have to remember, these actions hurt China too. The Australian coal ban, for example, led directly to rolling power shortages across China in 2021. Banning high-quality food imports means higher prices for their own consumers.
But for them, the cost is worth it.
It's deemed a necessary price to pay to enforce political obedience from other countries. For the CCP, political control is the highest priority. It trumps economic stability, consumer welfare, everything. And that is a crucial insight for any global business.
Which brings us to the big question. If this pattern is so obvious, And the science is so clearly on Japan's side. Why does Beijing stick so rigidly to the food safety lie? Why not just admit it?
Because the lie is structural. They've built this complex, multi-layered defense system around that lie, both legally and politically. Admitting the truth would cause the whole structure to collapse.
Okay, let's walk through those layers. What's reason number one?
Reason one, it's a self-incriminating violation of WTO rules. The moment they admit the ban is retaliation for a statement on Taiwan, they are openly violating the WTO's core principles of non-discrimination.
In legal terms, it's like handing the prosecution the murder weapon with their fingerprints all over it.
It is. It would make it incredibly easy for Japan to win a WTO complaint. But by hiding behind the technical dispute facade, they can drag the process out for years. It becomes a costly legal battle over scientific data, not a clear-cut political case.
So the lie is a legal shield. What's reason two?
Reason two, it means losing the moral high ground on the world stage.
Which is incredibly important to them.
Immensely. The CCP spends billions on its global image, trying to project itself as this responsible, sophisticated great power. Admitting they use food as a political weapon shatters that image. It brands them as a marketplace bully, a thug state.
It puts them in the same category as regimes that have zero international respect or predictability. The appearance of legitimacy is everything.
And that leads to reason three. The massive risk of domestic backlash. This might be the most critical reason of all.
Because of the narrative they've built at home.
Exactly. State media has spent years telling 1.4 billion people that these bans are necessary because foreign food is toxic, the West is trying to poison them, and the government is their great protector.
They're the shield defending the people.
Right. So imagine if the government suddenly admitted, actually, that Japanese seafood is perfectly safe. We were just angry about the Prime Minister's comments on Taiwan.
It would completely shatter public trust.
It would force people to realize they were lied to for years, that they paid higher prices for lower quality food, all for a political game. That kind of betrayal could turn their most ardent online nationalist supporters into angry, disillusioned critics overnight.
And that kind of internal instability is a fundamental threat to the party's hold on power.
They cannot risk it. Which brings us to the final point, reason four. It would set a global precedent for retaliation.
This is about long-term self-preservation.
Absolutely. If China officially admits that it uses trade as a political weapon, it gives a green light to the US, the EU, and other powers to do the same thing right back at them.
So, for example, if China bans seafood over Taiwan, the U.S. could turn around and ban Chinese rare earth minerals, citing human rights issues in Xinjiang.
The floodgates would open. Right now, the West still tries to frame its trade actions within specific trade rules, like anti-dumping or subsidy violations. If China removes the very foundation of that restraint, the economic conflict would escalate into what analysts call a four-way loss for Beijing.
Self-destruction, arming the enemy, domestic chaos, and international isolation.
It's a losing game for them. So the lie, no matter how transparently absurd it is to the rest of the world, is structurally necessary for them to maintain their room to maneuver. They will cling to the food safety script to the very end.
And this entire pattern, the bans, the lies, the fear of accountability, it all goes back to something more fundamental, right? It connects to China's whole relationship with the global trading system.
It does. It goes right to the core of the global trust deficit. It all comes down to the promises they made 24 years ago when they joined the World Trade Organization.
Promises that critics now say were only signed to get in the door, with no real intention of ever fully honoring them.
That's the heart of the issue. In 2001, China signed a very strict accession protocol to get into the WTO. It was a contract that promised massive deep market reform. But whenever those promised reforms conflicted with the party's central goal, which is maintaining absolute control, the reforms were just quietly shelved.
So let's break down that list of broken promises. What were the big foundational commitments that the US, EU, and Japan are constantly pointing to now?
We have to start with the most critical one. State-owned enterprise, or SOE, subsidies. China promised to dramatically reduce these subsidies and force their state-owned companies to compete on real market principles.
But the reality has been the exact opposite.
The complete opposite. The subsidies didn't shrink, they exploded. By 2024, credible estimates suggest that these subsidies are running at over 5% of China's total GDP.
And that's not just a number. That state-backed money floods the global market.
It leads directly to massive overcapacity. We saw it 15 years ago with steel dumping, and we're seeing it right now with the global fights over solar panels and electric vehicles. China produces far more than the world can absorb, all backed by state cash, which distorts prices everywhere and just cripples foreign competitors who have to play by market rules.
It makes fair competition impossible. Okay, next on the list. The one that affects every Western tech company, forced technology transfer.
They promised to end any practice that required foreign firms to hand over their secret sauce, their proprietary tech, in exchange for market access. The reality, it continues relentlessly. It's just gotten more sophisticated.
It's not crude theft anymore. It's done through bureaucratic leverage.
Precisely. It's disguised through administrative licensing or by requiring you to form a joint venture with a local state-owned company. And that local partner, of course, gains access to your designs, your source code, your manufacturing processes, which are then often reverse engineered. It was a core finding of the US 301 investigation years ago, and it's still a huge source of friction.
What about just basic market access, especially in key sectors?
They promised to open up critical areas like finance, telecommunications, insurance, cloud computing. But the reality is, while some small windows have opened, there are still very strict limits on foreign ownership and what foreign companies are actually allowed to do. The official negative lists, which say where foreign money can't go, are still incredibly restrictive.
If you can't even get in the door, you can't compete. And then there's the transparency issue, which makes it impossible to even track what's going on.
This is maybe the biggest failure of all. China promised the WTO full annual reporting of all state and local subsidies. The reality, the WTO estimates that 99% of those subsidies are never reported.
It's a total black box.
It is. And if other countries can't see the subsidies, they can't calculate the true cost of a product, and they can't launch effective countermeasures. It creates an information imbalance that cripples the whole system.
And finally, what about the legal system itself, the rule of law and judicial review?
They promised independent courts to handle trade cases and protect intellectual property. But in reality, judicial decisions, especially in sensitive IP theft cases, are often subordinated to the party's will. A foreign company is statistically far less likely to win an infringement case against a local Chinese company, even with overwhelming evidence.
So stepping back, this whole pattern of selective compliance, what does it tell us about how the party views international agreements?
It suggests they see the rules as situational, not sacred. The CCP views something like WTO membership as a strategy. It was a tool to enter the global system, to get capital, to get technology, to modernize. They do not see it as a permanent moral or contractual obligation if it conflicts with their core interests.
There's an academic term for this, right?
Yeah.
An opportunistic, selective revisionist state.
That's the perfect description. They use the global system when it helps them grow, but they actively undermine or revise the rules when it gets in the way of national strategy. They only pretend to comply to maintain that thin veil of international legitimacy. The contract is just a tool they can pick up or put down whenever they want.
And that systemic flaw, the fact that the contract is basically void the moment politics demand it, is the fundamental reason the global business community is now rethinking its entire relationship with China. So what's the inevitable consequence of all this? If you're a business or a country and you can't trust the science, you can't trust the contracts, you can't trust the political stability, you have to change your game plan.
The primary consequence is that the China market is now being institutionally classified as high risk and replaceable. For international firms, especially in Japan, the EU, and the US, the extreme political unpredictability is starting to outweigh the benefits of market access.
And this has fueled the huge global trend we're seeing now. The de-risking movement.
This movement is accelerating everywhere, and it's being driven by Beijing's own actions. In the United States, the focus is on decoupling in key tech sectors, the small yard, high fence strategy, while also pushing friendshoring, which means moving critical supply chains only to trusted allies like Mexico, Vietnam, or India.
And Europe, which for a long time tried to stay more neutral and economically focused, has also shifted dramatically.
The European Union has now officially labeled China a systemic rival, and crucially, they've implemented a very powerful legal tool specifically designed to fight back against this kind of political trade attack. It's called the Anti-Coercion Instrument, or ACI.
Let's spend a second on the ACI because this is really important. It directly addresses the problem that the WTO is just too slow to handle these sudden political attacks.
Exactly. The ACI is a direct admission that the WTO's multi-year complaint process is useless when a country like Lithuania is facing an immediate economic shutdown. The ACI allows the EU to fast-track countermeasures. They can impose tariffs or restrict market access on the coercing country almost immediately.
So if China tries the delete the country code trick again, the EU can legally and swiftly hit back with its own painful measures.
It acts as a deterrent. Its real power is its speed. It sends a signal to Beijing. If you use economic coercion against one of our smaller members, the entire EU bloc of 27 nations can retaliate as one and do it quickly.
Yeah.
It dramatically changes the cost-benefit analysis of bullying smaller countries.
And Japan, the victim in our current story, has also responded strategically.
Japan has elevated economic security to a core part of its national security policy. They are actively subsidizing their own companies, offering billions of dollars in incentives to relocate production out of China, to bring it home or move it to reliable allied nations.
They're fundamentally restructuring their economy to be less vulnerable to these mood swings.
That's the goal, to become impervious to Beijing's sudden trade freezes. It all highlights the brutal fact that countries like Australia, Lithuania, Canada, and now Japan have all learned the hard way.
Which is that a relationship with the CCP is never a stable win-win partnership.
At its core, it's a one-sided extortion game. Your economic prosperity, whether it's your valuable seafood or a critical mineral, can be instantly confiscated with the push of a people's indignation button whenever Beijing feels its political red lines have been crossed.
And as long as they view international trade as a weapon to enforce political compliance, this global shift toward de-risking is just going to keep accelerating, no matter what vague scientific excuse they come up with next.
Yeah.
The cost of that unpredictability has just become too high.
Our whole discussion today really underscores a crucial point for everyone listening. You always have to maintain critical, independent thinking when you're faced with official statements, especially when these vague, non-verifiable claims like food safety or quarantine failure are being used as a shield for obvious political moves.
Absolutely. And look, we haven't offered any investment advice today. We've just laid out the data and the geopolitical pattern. But the trend is crystal clear. In today's global environment, predictability and stability are the most valuable commodities a trading partner can have.
And that's exactly what is fundamentally missing from Beijing's current economic and diplomatic policies.
We really appreciate you tuning in for this deep dive into global trade and geopolitics.
And we want to be very clear that we are simply providing objective facts and analysis for discussion. We hold no bias or discrimination against any country, group, or people.
As always, if you enjoyed this and want more analysis like it, please subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast wherever you're listening. And definitely go check out our old friend Micky's YouTube channel, Micky to Life. He's got some great travel vlogs and some really fun memes we think you'll enjoy.
Until next time.
See you later.